We all have this idea of motivation as, willpower. It's that voice in your head that gets you off the couch.
Exactly. The thing that tells you to finish that project or even just get out of bed.
But what if that voice, what if that entire internal drive just disappeared? And I don't mean you're feeling lazy or burned out. I mean a complete neurological absence of the will to start anything.
No curiosity, no desire.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive into the science behind that inner switch, focusing on a really rare, but I think incredibly important condition called athymhormia. So based on the research we've shared, our mission here is to guide you through what this syndrome is actually like, how it's defined, what's going on in the brain, and what it tells us about something as fundamental as drive itself.
And that idea of a go signal is the perfect place to start because athymhormia is, at its core, a disorder of what's called autoactivation.
Autoactivation. Self-start.
Precisely. People with this condition experience this profound loss of inner drive, of emotional connection, all their preferences, their curiosity. It just vanishes. But, and this is the part that is so hard to believe, their ability to think, to move, their memory, all of that can remain completely intact.
That's the thing that's so hard to get your head around. You're describing a kind of inner emptiness. A person is there cognitively, but they're just inert.
Yeah, and the way patients describe it is, well, it's startling. They often talk about an inner silence, a feeling that there are no thoughts, no internal chatter, no mental pictures, and because nothing is bubbling up from inside, nothing feels worth starting. There's no urge, no impulse.
Wow.
And that brings us to, I think, the most critical distinction we need to make right away. This is not depression.
Right. Because people hear no motivation and they immediately jump to depression.
They do. But in clinical depression, the emotional engine is running. It's just It's running on pain, on guilt, on these really powerful negative thoughts.
So the engine is on. It's just running badly. But with athymhormia, the engine just isn't turning over at all.
That's it exactly. Athymhormia is defined by that emotional silence. The patients themselves will often just flatly deny having strong feelings. They don't feel sad, but they don't feel happy either. They just don't feel much. It's a collapse of drive, not an overflow of sadness.
So if you were to put this on a kind of spectrum of motivation disorders, where would it sit?
It's definitely on the severe end of a broader family. You could think of it as a subtype of apathy.
Okay.
So on the really mild end, you have, common apathy, the kind someone might get after a head injury or even just a bad illness.
A bit more familiar.
Right. Athymhormia is a huge leap in severity from that, specifically because of this loss of autoactivation. And then at the far, far end of the scale, you have something called akinetic mutism,
Which is
a state where a person is awake, but shows almost zero voluntary movement or speech, total stillness.
So it seems like French psychiatry was really at the forefront of identifying this. The name itself, athymhormia, where does that come from?
It's Greek. A combination, really. You have athymia, which means without mood, and hormia, meaning without drive or impulse.
Without mood, without drive.
Yep. And the term as a syndrome really took shape in France. Early on, you had researchers like Deed and Gros in the early 20th century. They were studying this profound lack of initiative in some patients with schizophrenia and coined the term.
But it wasn't linked to a specific brain injury yet.
Not clearly. That came later, and it was a game changer. In the 1980s, a researcher named Dominique Laplaine and his colleagues started describing this loss of psychic autoactivation.
And they found it in patients with what kind of damage?
Lesions. Very specific small areas of damage in a part of the brain called the basal ganglia.
Okay, so for those of us who haven't brushed up on our neural anatomy, what exactly is the basal ganglia's job?
You can think of it as the brain's, its traffic control center, or maybe a gateway. It doesn't come up with the big plan, but it's what's needed to turn a thought or an intention into an actual action.
I see.
And Laplaine's big observation was that these patients with that specific damage could move and think just fine, but only when prompted.
Only when someone else was starting the engine for them.
Exactly. They initiated almost nothing on their own. And this was solidified later by another researcher, Michel Habib, who linked it to damage in the corpus striatum, which is a key part of the basal ganglia. He even proposed a whole hormothymic system for drive and mood.
So this seems like a pretty well-defined neurological thing. Why isn't it a household name? Why isn't it a diagnosis you hear about?
Well, because it's not a standalone diagnosis in the big manuals like the DSM-5. You won't find it there.
Really?
Yeah. It's understood today more as a very specific and severe clinical pattern that falls under that wider umbrella of apathy disorders. It's something neurologists and neuropsychiatrists would definitely recognize, though.
Okay, so let's get into that clinical picture. If you were to meet someone with this condition, what would you see day to day?
The case studies are pretty consistent. The first thing is a severe loss of any self-started activity.
So sitting.
Long periods of sitting, lying down, no plans being made. Then there's this profound lack of desire, of curiosity, hobbies, interests. They just evaporate. If you ask them why they don't do anything, they might literally say, I can't be bothered.
And emotionally?
Almost totally flat. Relatives will report, that the person just doesn't react. Not to good news, not to bad news, just nothing.
Okay, but this is the part that I find so fascinating, the clinical paradox. This is what really sets it apart.
Yes. This is the absolute core of the syndrome. When you give that person a clear step-by-step instruction, they can do it.
Complex things.
Absolutely. They can get dressed, they can follow a recipe to cook a meal, they can answer very nuanced, difficult questions, their motor system is fine, their language is fine, their intelligence is preserved.
So it's not that they can't do things.
No. It's not a lack of energy or ability or understanding. It's a pure disturbance of internal initiation. They need an external trigger, a cue from the outside world to fire up the circuit that says, start now.
So it really is like having a perfect high-performance car, full tank of gas, you know exactly how to drive it, but the ignition key is just gone.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yep.
And it leads us right to the brain. Where is that ignition switch physically?
Right.
All the evidence from stroke, from TBI, from degenerative disease, it all points to a very specific network.
The one that connects our feelings to our actions.
That's the one. It's a critical loop. The main players are the basal ganglia, our traffic controller, especially parts called the striatum and globus pallidus.
Okay.
Those connect to the thalamus, which is like a relay station, and then out to the prefrontal cortex, which does the planning. And crucially, the limbic system, our emotion and reward center, is plugged right into that same circuit.
So when that circuit gets broken,
The go signal disappears. Habib's model basically says motivation is this special function right at the intersection of wanting something, which is emotion, and doing something, which is action. You break the wiring between the reward center and the action initiation center, and you get this void.
and that explains anatomically why the external prompts work.
Exactly. The rest of the machinery is fine, the intellect, the muscles, but with the internal trigger gone, an external cue, it's like a temporary bypass. It jump-starts the system.
But only temporarily.
That's the key. You have to keep cueing. The moment the prompting stops, the action stops.
That sounds incredibly demanding for caregivers, for family.
Yeah.
Just unbelievably difficult.
It is.
So where do we typically see this severe deficit? I know the Pure syndrome is rare, but these patterns of autoactivation problems must show up elsewhere.
Oh, absolutely. We see it in a number of neurological conditions. It's reported after those focal basal ganglia lesions we talked about, like tiny strokes deep in the brain. It's also a major feature in advanced Parkinson's disease. The dopamine depletion in Parkinson's hits those same motivation circuits really hard.
And head injuries.
Yes, a specific subgroup of patients after a traumatic brain injury, a TBI, can develop this, and also certain types of strokes, especially those affecting the frontal lobe connections.
So with the diagnosis being so dependent on observation, how do doctors make sure they're not just looking at someone with very severe depression or fatigue?
It's a really careful process, a differential diagnosis. It relies on meticulous clinical interviews, getting a detailed history from caregivers about the change.
So you need that before and after picture.
You really do. And then you use imaging to look for the brain damage, but you also explicitly work to rule out the things that can look similar. Is there pervasive sadness? No. Is there the kind of global cognitive decline you'd see in dementia? No.
And there are tools to measure this.
There are. You can use validated scales, something like the dimensional apathy scale, which helps quantify it. It has sections that specifically measure that initiation component to confirm you're looking at this autoactivation problem.
So let's talk about management. Is there a pill you can take for a broken ignition switch?
Unfortunately, no specific cure exists for the syndrome itself. The first step is always to manage the underlying cause.
So in a Parkinson's patient, for example, you'd optimize their medication.
Right. You'd focus on the dopaminergic treatments, since we know dopamine is absolutely central to reward and initiation. Sometimes those drugs can help reduce apathy, but the evidence is pretty mixed. The structural damage, the broken wires, that's still there.
Which means the most effective and consistent treatment has to be external support.
It has to be. Since we know those external cues work, the core of rehabilitation is building a highly structured environment.
Constant prompting.
Constant prompting, clear routines, breaking down every task into small steps, just to get through a basic day. And this is where family education is so vital.
They have to understand it's not laziness.
They have to. Understanding this isn't a choice, it's not a character flaw, it's a direct physical consequence of a brain injury. That is everything. It reduces the blame and frustration and helps guide them toward a management strategy that can actually work.
So when we step back, what does this all mean? Why should someone who, thankfully, isn't dealing with a stroke or a TBI care about this incredibly rare syndrome?
I think it's significant because studying athymhormia it completely demystifies willpower.
Right. It takes it out of the realm of character and puts it into circuitry.
Exactly. It shows us that our fundamental drive, our ability to start, is rooted in these specific physical brain networks. It's a manufactured process. And it shows us that the capacity to do something and the drive to initiate it are two completely separate functions in the brain.
That's a huge takeaway.
For clinicians, it's invaluable. You avoid mislabeling a patient as uncooperative or just depressed, which leads you down the wrong treatment path entirely. And for families, it offers a much more compassionate way to understand what can feel like a devastating and baffling personality change.
It gives them a framework.
Yeah.
A reason.
It does. And maybe here's a final thought for you to explore. If our own self-generated motivation, that little push that gets you to write an email or go for a run or even just think a new thought, if that relies so heavily on these basal ganglia limbic circuits to send that go signal, what does that imply about the physical nature, maybe even the limits of free will in our everyday decisions? When you wake up tomorrow and decide to start your day, just take a second and think about where your own internal go signal is really coming from.